Shalom, everybody. This is Watchman Alexander here for another interview while I'm at the Hear the Watchmen Conference 2018, and I have the great pleasure of speaking with Derek Gilbert.
It's my honor. Thank you
for talking with me.
Oh, my honor.
So your session yesterday or day before was about your new book, which deals a lot with the ancient aliens subject matter and the whole UFO phenomenon. So can you tell us a little bit about why you're writing about that?
Well, Josh Peck and I co-authored the book because during both of us have had a long interest in science fiction, UFOs, the possibility of extraterrestrial life. During the 2016 presidential campaign, that became an issue because of the release of emails to John Podesta, who was Hillary Clinton's campaign chair, some of which included emails from the late Dr. Edgar Mitchell, who was the sixth man on the moon, Apollo astronaut, scientist, respected in his field, but also had a very deep interest in spiritual matters, but he was trying to approach it from a scientific perspective. And sadly, it appears that he ruled out the truth claims of Christianity as one possible explanation for what's going on out there. In other words, communications that he had been told about by people who claimed they were hearing from aliens from the contiguous universe, whatever that means. Apparently, the UFO phenomenon, UFO community is beginning to consider that the entities that have been visiting us and contacting us are coming from other dimensions rather than from outside our solar system. Well, as we looked at that and realized, if they're talking about extra-dimensional entities, which is also a theory, by the way, that secular researchers like Jacques Vallée, J. Allen Hynek, who was a part of the Operation Blue Book investigations run by the Air Force, he's the guy who came up with the close encounters of the first, second, third, fourth kind scale. They felt that the evidence reported by observers of unidentified flying objects better fit an extra-dimensional hypothesis rather than an extraterrestrial hypothesis. So we as Christians, we need to step back and say, well, wait a minute now. You're talking extra-dimensional entities. Hey, that's our language. Okay, we can offer an explanation for this. The reason we felt compelled to do it is not because it's just an interesting topic, but because when you look at surveys of what people believe, what American adults believe, the 2012 survey conducted by National Geographic showed that 36% of American adults believe we are being visited by extraterrestrial entities right now. More than 1 out of every 3 of us believe ET is visiting us right now.
Which is way higher than the amount of people that are believing in the biblical God, or biblical account.
The Barna Group, which is a respected Christian survey organization, takes the spiritual temperature of Americans on a regular basis, and they find in their most recent survey that even though over 70% of Americans identify as Christian, 46% of Americans say, oh yes, I have a biblical worldview. But when Barna starts drilling down into what they actually believe about core tenets of Christianity, was Jesus born of a virgin? Did he live a sinless life? Can you earn your way into heaven? Things like that Christians should know as part of basic doctrine. And only like 6 points. So this wasn't like a long, test or anything. Just 6 key points of doctrine that should be easy for Christians to answer. He found that only 10% of American adults have a biblical worldview. So 36% of Americans believe in ET, 10% of Americans have a biblical worldview. Now, why do those numbers matter? Because many of the people who are believing in extraterrestrial visitation believe that extraterrestrials, being more advanced, not just technologically, but spiritually, hold the answers to the big questions of life. Where did we come from? Why are we here? And what happens to us when we die? In other words, it's a 21st century sci-fi religion that has more true believers than the Christian church.
Isn't it interesting how so many of these alien hunters and alien files, they want to channel the aliens these days. They think they can actually reach out mentally or psychically.
One of the leading proponents for official disclosure, and that's the website for the book, by the way, is officialdisclosure.com. Tom Horn, in his wisdom, grabbed that domain years ago, and we're not selling it. It's a great domain. Anyway, one of the leading proponents, Dr. Stephen Greer of the Center for the Study of Extraterrestrial Intelligence, openly admits that the best way, we're having trouble contacting these ETs because the military-industrial complex won't let their communications through to Earth. In other words, these aliens apparently are so technologically and spiritually advanced they can cross the galaxy, but they can't get a webcam signal through
Right.
the military industrial. So we have to reach out to them.
Or if they don't want to, why do they then want to speak to the average Joe who's trying to reach out psychically?
Well, that's a really good question. And again, it's a question not being asked often enough, either inside the UFO community or by Christians who are saying, let's think about this critically. Come, let us reason together. Why is it they can travel across the galaxy and they can't pick up a phone? They can't send up a flare. They can't modulate beams of laser or something to send a Morse code. No, it is always telepathic communications. And Dr. Greer, in fact, has a smartphone app for reaching out telepathically to teach you how to meditate and open your mind and spirit to these entities for what he calls a close encounter of the fifth kind, which is telepathic or spiritual communion with these entities. Now, as Christians, we should understand why that is a dangerous practice that we do not recommend. It is a spiritual quest, and we saw that firsthand. We traveled, Josh, myself, Sharon, my wife, Dr. Michael Heiser. We went down to Roswell, New Mexico for the 70th anniversary of the famous crash last July. And while we were there, we saw plenty of booths where people were willing to give you a psychic reading, read tarot card, read your palm, whatever. Why would that be there? I mean, if this was really a question of determining how extraterrestrials conquered the technological and scientific challenges of interstellar travel. I mean, hey, can we talk to them and maybe buy the hyperdrive from them?
Right.
Can we buy the secret of traveling through?
I imagine people are probably wanting to know if, or they're coming to the conclusion that if these beings are that advanced that they can do such a thing, they've probably reached some level of enlightenment and spiritual upliftment that they can share with us. But
I don't see how that logically follows. But again, that's one of those critical questions. That's why does this follow this?
It could be the board.
Yeah, exactly. It's all science. So the question is, again, we saw all of these New Age practices there, but we did not see any, MIT wasn't there recruiting students for the next generation of astrophysicists, okay? NASA wasn't there trying to recruit good employees. It was all New Age. And then some Christians trying to outreach to us. And again, a shout out to Guy Malone, our missionary to Roswell. God love you, brother, for living out there in the desert. This is why we wrote the book. It's a new religion. It's based on an assumption that somehow these space brothers will provide the answers to the questions that we Christians have between the covers of the Bible. Why are we here? Where did we come from? What happens when we die? We know those answers, but for some reason, millions of people are turning to extraterrestrials for those answers.
Mm-hmm. One more thing before we close up. You mentioned something that I've been trying to share with people quite a bit, which is that a lot of the alien abductions that have occurred to people who are Christians or nominal Christians, they will, at the time of the abduction, call on the name of Jesus, and it will immediately stop the abduction experience, which to me is proof positive that this is a spiritual phenomenon, not a physical one.
Right, and that's exactly what led our friend Joe Jordan, who's the co-founder of CE4 Research Group, to basically reject the New Age beliefs that he held for a long time. I mean, Joe will tell you, if you ask him, he was, what is his words, flaming New Ager. But because of his investigations as the state director for MUFON, Mutual UFO Network in Florida, investigating accounts of abductions, which, by the way, it's a separate phenomenon from UFOs. I mean, UFOs, many of these are just misidentified natural phenomena or secret craft that the government is working on, or just misidentified commercial craft. We don't, there are a few that don't fit into that category. We address that in the book, but the abduction phenomenon is something else. People are legitimately being traumatized by whatever it is that's going on.
Sexually abused a lot of times.
Yes. Secular researcher Dr. John Mack, a Harvard psychologist before his death about 10 years ago, compared the stories of people who've been abducted, claimed to have been abducted, with the stories of people who claimed to be have been ritually abused, victims of satanic ritual abuse. And he found about 36 points of correlation, similarities in the stories, more than just coincidence. This is a spiritual attack. And as Joe discovered in investigating hundreds of cases, that because they can be stopped in the name of Jesus, that's what led him to accept Jesus Christ as Lord and Savior. So in the book, that's, we address that. We address the tendency of the UFO community to take people who come forward with these stories, and rather than directing them to counseling, either psychological or spiritual, which people, victims of trauma need, they reinforce their narrative. Yes, this is happening. You've been chosen. You're special. This is good, because it reinforces their belief. It confirms their bias that extraterrestrial intelligence exists, that they're here visiting us on Earth, and that somehow they hold the key to humanity's future.
That's incredibly dangerous for that person's psyche.
Psyche and spirit.
Yeah. Well, Derek, you have done a lot of work in this latest book that really is the same stuff that I was trying to put into my second novel, a nonfiction book, Leviathan's Ruse 2. Part of that book was going to be dedicated to talking about this phenomenon, so you beat me to the punch. And I may have to just buy an abridged copy of your book and just put that into Leviathan's Ruse.
There are a lot of researchers who've done a lot of heavy lifting, and again, kudos to Josh Peck, who did a lot of the work, especially on the documenting the contact between people who are well-respected members of our scientific community of academia and at high levels of the American government, and presumably governments all over the world, who are turning to this phenomenon, turning to this promise of salvation to our space brothers. He did a lot of work there. But then, in the book, we also show the clear connections between the occult teachings of Helena Blavatsky and Aleister Crowley. And then, I know a lot of researchers will hold up Crowley as a boogeyman and Blavatsky as a boogeyman, boogie person. But it's clear that their writings influenced the occult, or the occult-ish horror fiction of H.P. Lovecraft. And it is clearly documented by an excellent researcher by the name of Jason Colavito that Lovecraft's fiction was the inspiration for Chariots of the Gods, the book by Eric von Daniken, who has now sold over 60 million copies. And Chariots of the Gods, believe it or not, is the most popular book of archaeology ever sold on planet Earth, which it's horrifying when you think about it, because von Daniken in interviews has admitted that his information doesn't come from field work. I mean, he doesn't actually go to these megalithic sites in Peru and in the Middle East and in Cambodia. He gets it by channeling it from somewhere in what he calls the fourth dimension.
Great.
That's where von Daniken gets his information and creates the best-selling book of archaeology.
Stuff out, right?
Right, exactly. But people don't, because it's an attractive ruse, to borrow your word, because it's a belief system, a religion that doesn't require any change on my part. All it requires is gnosis, knowledge. Right. I don't have to change the way I think and act, which, as believers in Jesus Christ,
which is what the enemy has wanted all along.
Exactly. Do as thou wilt shall be the whole of the law, and ye shall be as gods. The oldest line in the book.
Yeah. Have you noticed how much H.P. Lovecraft's material is exploding in popularity?
Oh, yeah.
And the Cthulhu stuff just seems to be popping up everywhere.
Right. People don't even recognize how much influence Lovecraft has had on guys like John Carpenter. His famous movie The Thing with Kurt Russell, that is inspired by Lovecraft's short story At the Mountains of Madness, set in Antarctica, where they come across an ancient supernatural or supernatural-ish evil that needs to be defeated. The same with the Alien versus Predator. Ridley Scott, the Alien versus Predator film, was set in Antarctica, ancient pyramid under the ice. The more recent film, Prometheus. Again, ancient gods came to Earth, created mankind.
Sea of life here.
Exactly. Those are themes that come right out of Lovecraft. A couple of French science fiction authors who were fascinated with pseudo-archaeology drew upon Lovecraft's work and his themes to write a book called Morning of the Magicians, 1960. It sold well enough that it inspired von Daniken. In fact, it inspired him so much that the two Frenchmen, Powles and Bergier, had to sue him, or threatened to sue him, in order to get credit in Chariots of the Gods. So again, it's a clear line of communication, transmission rather. Lovecraft, who drew on theosophy for inspiration for his stories, and then we show in the book that there's a good chance that he was actually channeling the same spirit, even though Lovecraft thought he was an atheist, called himself an atheist. He may have been channeling the same spirit as Aleister Crowley. How that informed the work of Powles and Bergier, who then were inspiration for von Daniken. But in pop culture, movies like The Thing, Predator, Alien versus Predator, gothic horror There was a video game that my daughter and I played years ago before I realized that, hey, maybe as a Christian I shouldn't be doing this, called Eternal Darkness or something of that nature. Anyway, very much inspired by Lovecraft, the whole Cthulhu mythos, and many of the creatures in that game. Once I began reading some Lovecraft, was aware of the influence that he had on that game and on that whole genre of Gothic horror fiction. The Necronomicon, which was a creation of Lovecraft, this grimoire, a book of evil spells. Other authors who were friends of Lovecraft borrowed that with his permission in their stories, to the point where people believed it was real. And in fact, a researcher by the name of, well, under the pseudonym Simon, there's about a 95% chance that it's actually a researcher by the name of Peter Labenda. His name's on the copyright anyway. Wrote the Necronomicon and had it published in the late 70s. And you can still buy it today. It's still in print today. And there are people who will swear that bad things happen when you mess around with it. So
we tend to think that human beings are coming up with all of these things. And to some degree, we're borrowing from each other, we're getting inspired from each other. But I'm totally convinced that it's the spiritual forces behind all of this that are influencing the kinds of stories that they tell, because story is so important in driving people's behavior and their beliefs.
Right. It's almost as though Paul knew what he was writing about when he wrote, "We wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities and powers." That's exactly right. And we tend to forget that. We are very short-sighted because something afflicts us. We sense it with our natural senses, and so we look for a natural fix instead of thinking, hey, wait a minute, maybe this is something that's coming from outside the realm that I can perceive with my eyes and ears.
And that's where we have to get into the supernatural victory that we have in Christ.
Amen.
Well, this man has obviously done his research, as you can tell. Check out his work. And Josh Peck, by the way, has agreed to be on my podcast, so you'll be hearing from him pretty soon. Also, they can find you on SkyWatchTV.
Yeah.
Which programs do you run other than Sci Friday and
we host the main weekly program, SkyWatchTV, which is syndicated on the Christian Television Network, Victory Television Network, Impact Network, Angel One, and GEB America. I think that's all of it. But of course, we got the SkyWatchTV channel on Roku, Apple TV, and of course at YouTube as well. So that program, and then Sharon and I host a weekly Bible study that we produce from home. It's not video, but you can find it on YouTube as well as at our website, gilberthouse.org. We just go through the Bible 1 hour at a time, however many chapters we get through in that period of time. We're, going on 4 years doing it now, but we found some interesting things there when we start reading the Bible out loud, back and forth, and like, wait a minute, was that always in there? So yeah, gilberthouse.org is another site I would recommend.
Okay, thanks for talking with me.
My honor. Thank you.
See you all soon.